Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Emily Harle. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. Today we'll be finding out about the work the British Heart Foundation has been doing to promote equality, diversity and inclusion.
The BHF recently published a new set of EDI ambitions, and here to tell us all about them is Chief Executive Charmaine Griffiths. Charmaine is the BHF's first female Chief Executive. She recently celebrated 6 years in post and joined the BHF in February 2020 from the Institute of Cancer Research. Hello, Charmaine.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
You launched the BHF's first EDI strategy in 2022. Please tell us about your recent ambitions and why now felt like the time for a refresh.
We are really proud of our Igniting Change strategy, which is the BHF's first ever strategy setting out its collective and cohesive goals to tackle inequalities. And we were prompted to produce that document, as so many other organisations in the world were at the time, with a focus on inequalities in the wake, of course, of the death of George Floyd. So we were moved as a BHF to challenge ourselves, were we doing enough as an organisation to tackle inequalities in all of their senses in our role as one of the world's leading funders of cardiovascular research, but also as a team ourselves. So the Igniting Change strategy for me has been a fantastic platform for driving change within the BHF in three big parts. It was really important to us. This was, one, a very real document that would be a true change driver for us as a BHF. Two, that it was something that we could measure and judge ourselves on progress with really clearly. And three, that none of it was what I would describe as superficial, that it was addressing real focus for us and had real change as a goal. So the Igniting Change strategy overall had three main pillars. It was, who are we as a team and who do we need to be representative of the communities we serve? What are we doing as a funder to drive equality and better output and impact for us as a funder of cardiovascular research? And how are we going to tackle health inequalities? So the third pillar was, in terms of health, how are we going to use our voice, the voice of the patients and people that we serve, to drive change as well? And we've published the results of that, and it is changing and has changed who we are as a British Heart Foundation. So now is the perfect time for us to be refreshing that and talking about the future.
And tell us about the sort of updates. I understand that it was a 3-year strategy. You've had a few months for reflection, review, and working out what's next. What's the latest?
So one of the things that we were able to do, because we'd made solid foundations and progress through Igniting Change, was actually build into our overarching strategy as a BHF. What is it that we want to do and see changed in terms of inequalities? We know that heart disease is a disease of inequality, where you're born, your income, your gender, and other factors drive your risk and likelihood of getting heart disease. So we have, I think, to the best of our ability, integrated a focus on inequalities in almost every aspect of our strategy, from who we are as a people and a team to what are we doing in terms of our funding capabilities and how we're using our advocacy and voice. So we are proud to be publishing our revised ambitions for that. We know we've made lots of great progress, but know that we have more to do. So around each of the three main pillars, people, research and health inequalities, we've set out new ambitions for the period ahead. And to perhaps bring one of those to life. So for us as a team, like most teams, I think in the charity sector, we are committed to being the most inclusive and diverse employer we can. It's really important to me personally and to the BHF that we're representative of the communities we serve. And so that's the 8 million people in the UK living with heart and circulatory disease, and the millions more that are trying to look after their health and have healthier hearts for longer. So we're really pleased to be seeing that the changes that we've made to our recruitment process to encourage more diverse applications to the BHF are paying dividends. Really proud to see that our Aspire leadership programme, which is specifically looking at supporting colleagues from minority ethnic backgrounds, has been a brilliant success. Activities like that are helping us fundamentally shift the profile of BHF's colleagues and workforce. So that's one big area where we've now restated our next set of ambitions. We're literally about taking and again progressing to making sure we are even more representative of the communities we serve, and got particular focus on certain areas, for example, encouraging both recruitment and progression of more Black colleagues within the BHF, and again, excited to see the Aspire Leadership Programme help us achieve that in part.
And on that point of encouraging progression, BHF reported a 0% gender and ethnicity pay gap in 2025. This is compared to a UK average of 12.8%. So that's no small feat. How did you achieve this?
We are really proud to have achieved that through a number of reasons. One is being really clear on fairness in our pay structures and our performance and evaluation structures. And over time, we've gotten to a place where I believe that we're really strong in how we assess that objectively and have removed bias in our systems to a certain extent as we can. I think looking forward, for us, it's really important to that point on representation that we have, for example, on gender pay and gender kind of representation, that we are, again, representative of the population we serve. So roughly half of our kind of senior board is both a trustee level and executive level is male and half female. And that then kind of translates into, as you'd expect, fairness and minimal gaps then in our kind of pay and reward system. So for us, it starts at the top, of course, around the exec table and trustee table. So making sure that we're as diverse as we can be. We know on colleagues from minority ethnic background that we still have some work to do to make sure we'd like to see that better around our trustee and committee tables, and are making strides to do that. But that obviously has an impact on pay and balance within the organisation. And so we're constantly looking at how we can ensure that we have what most people want in their jobs, which is a fair structure in which performance and contribution are equally and fairly represented.
And you mentioned previously recruitment practices as well, so encouraging diversity through recruitment. Can you tell me what practical steps did you take to encourage more diversity when you're recruiting for new roles?
So in terms of increasing diversity in our recruitment, there are a number of things we've done that we know have really made a difference. Things like just making sure the whole process from start to end is as welcoming to people of all talents and backgrounds as possible. So that's everything from the language that we use in our recruitment process to making sure that there's blind evaluation of our CVs and personal details in the kind of selection process, to supporting and just really stating the welcomingness of the BHF to talent from all places. Frankly, if anyone's interested in tackling heart and circulatory disease and making a big dent in the universe, and you've got the talents to bring to the BHF, we want you to be interested in working with us. So we know that those steps and changes have made a difference, along with things like emphasising our flexible working policies and practices that I know make a huge difference to working parents, to people who have carer duties, and to people who are interested in joining the BHF as well. So we know that they've been particularly popular and particularly powerful in our recruitment processes as well.
And going back to your pay gap, 0% pay gap, which is an amazing achievement, particularly when you look at average statistics. I know we had you on this podcast just over 2 years ago when you were talking about the progress that was being made. You weren't quite at 0% then. Along that journey, was there anything that was unexpected or perhaps slightly more challenging than you had thought in terms of making sure that your recruitment was inclusive and ensuring that your pay was equal? Anything that was particularly surprising or required more work than you might have anticipated at the beginning?
So in my experience, most change is more complicated than I wish it would be, and takes a bit longer than I wish it did as well. And the scientist in me is always seeing things in probably the simplest of terms. There's no doubt that there are lots of things to change and modify to get right for us as a team. And we're on a journey. There will always be, I think, opportunities to improve. I think probably one of the most important things that we did and continue to do is state how important this is to us as a BHF. This isn't about just doing the right thing. It's about being more powerful and impactful as a team. We start with the premise that we need to be representative of the people we serve, and that our primary goal is to tackle heart and circulatory disease. But we know that then, like, kind of working backwards, what that means for us in terms of our colleagues and our team, and to how we attract the best talent. Clear communication is definitely a huge part of the success. Why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And I don't think anyone would argue with the principles of fairness for recognition, for contribution and performance. I think is something no one could challenge. In terms of recruitment, I think one of the things we had to do that's probably surprising is that it just took a bit more time to understand where the barriers were and what it is that we needed to do to make sure that we were tackling bias, recognizing it, and systematically kind of working through BHS processes. And again, I always wish things would happen more quickly and were simpler. And it just took a bit of time to do that. But to be honest, once we committed to doing it, we've got a great team. They just worked through what was required, listening to candidates and applicants, both unsuccessful and successful, and learning from that, and really holding on to the data. We are a scientifically data-driven organisation. You'd expect that from such a big research funder. So whenever we have uncertainty or ambiguity, we constantly go back to what's the data telling us. I think that's one of the most powerful ways in an area that is rightly rich with personal experience, personal views, personal bias. We all bring that to every moment in our lives and our working lives. So holding on to the data about what is the change we want to see and what are the things that drive shift in that data, almost scientifically, I think it's been a really powerful way that the team have approached it. Maybe on the positive, I think the welcoming of this internally and externally has been great. I mean, I have the privilege of speaking to hundreds of people around the BHF every month, and not once have I had someone challenge the work and focus in this area. And I think part of that has come because we're not just doing this as a policy or HR or people exercise because it's just the right thing to do. We genuinely believe and know this by being that team that is representative of the UK population and is doing things fairly that will be more impactful in our very mission. And that, I think, is such a powerful place to start the conversation.
And how do you gather feedback from staff on your progress throughout the journey?
So we get lots of feedback, both in terms of data from both applicants and successful candidates through our recruitment processes, but we also speak to and listen to our colleagues in lots of different ways all the time. We have formal surveys in which we're asking people on a regular basis, how do you feel about the BHF? How do you feel about your engagement and pride levels in being part of the team, and also being open to kind of suggestions and feedback? It's part, I would say, of the heart of the organisation is genuinely listening to people and adapting to make sure that we're always making the most of the brilliant talent that we have in our colleagues.
On the topic of the 0% gender and ethnicity pay gap, I wonder how much of a role transparency has played in reaching that level. Are you completely transparent about what everybody is earning within the BHF? And if so, how easy was that to put into place?
So we publish, of course, the ethnicity and gender pay gap review every year, and that's something that we communicate really clearly internally as well as externally. We hold ourselves accountable for being transparent on what that looks like and what that means for us and the actions arising for us as a BHF. And in fact, we actively and proactively chose first to publish the ethnicity pay gap, even though it wasn't required, as a kind of reflection of how important those two metrics are to the BHF. In terms of how we communicate about objectives, performance and progression and reward systems, again, we try to be as transparent as we can as a BHF. We've got a great people team who are constantly with business partners supporting colleagues and managers alike to make sure that we are getting the most out of people and as transparent as we can be through our performance systems as well. Of course, our annual report and accounts, as is right, publishes senior colleagues by my salary and senior colleagues by strata. Mm-hmm. So that information is publicly available again for those who are interested. But for us, this report and the report doing it every year is that kind of accountability moment for our supporters and the people who donate to us so generously, as well as kind of the wider public, talking about the progress that matters to us and the metrics that are driving that change as well.
Amazing. And as you say, it is a journey that BHF is still on. So what would you say are the most challenging inequalities to try and address within the organisation?
We'd really love to see our minority ethnic colleague kind of profile grow even further, and particularly around Black colleagues. And we're thinking about how to make that happen and how to support colleagues within the organisation, but also through our recruitment processes too. Perhaps the other part that is, for me, also really important is this is more than doing the right thing for us as a team and as a a group of brilliant colleagues. It is about using the power of the BHF as one of the world's biggest research funders and a big voice for patients to shift the dial. So we're really excited to be making partnerships focused on women and cardiovascular disease, which is a much misunderstood and still much needed area of focus. We don't understand the biology significantly, as women have different heart disease progression than men in some areas. We don't understand why enough. So these are research programs that are helping us understand that. But also we're tackling systematically the bias that exists within both the research environment, but also the healthcare and NHS cardiovascular system. Still scares me that only 1 in 8 cardiologists in the UK today is a woman. So if either the 3 of us needed a cardiologist, the likelihood is we not see a woman. And why is that important? Well, that is a reflection of the fact that both the research and the practices that have evolved over time, but how do you detect, understand, treat and care for women and women's hearts is inherently, because of how it's evolved, biased. And for us, it's really important that we kind of understand those factors that are specifically gender focused and get into those.
So would you say that that is the most difficult inequality that you're currently having to address at BHF? I know you must have no end of challenges and difficulties when it comes to levelling the playing field, both internally and externally. Would you say that that's the biggest issue, the fact that there are not enough women in research, scientific, clinical roles when it comes to tackling heart disease?
I wish I could say it was just one. It's not. That's one area where we've got 2 big research programs, and I really know that they're going to change. And what we know about women's cardiovascular health, I wish it were that simple. There are so many inequalities. I think I mentioned previously that heart disease is a disease that tracks really closely with inequalities. That means that people from poorer areas or less wealthy areas have far more risk of almost every health condition. And that's not just the prevention aspect of how easy it is to have a healthy life, a healthy diet, how easy it is to be encouraged and supported to be active and do all the things our bodies need to be healthy. But it's running through everything from then the kind of quality and also quantity of services and support that people have around them in their communities and healthcare practices to get, in the case of heart disease, it detected, treated and cared for appropriately. For 64 years of the BHF, those have been things that we've been campaigning on and championing for patients where they need it most. We know that heart disease doesn't happen equally across the UK, that people in certain areas live longer, in some cases decades longer than from other areas. So again, advocacy work to tackle health inequalities is squarely focused on drawing attention to those things and trying to make sure that we and governments, the devolved nations as well as Westminster, are taking action to make sure that when we put in systems and support and innovation to support heart patients, is done in a way that doesn't exacerbate inequalities and make sure that everybody who needs them gets the opportunity for the right treatment and care.
What would your advice be to other charity chief execs listening who are also operating within cause areas that are subject to inherent systemic biases? So, for example, with BHF, navigating the healthcare system, navigating those socioeconomic inequalities as well in terms of how we all experience our health. What would your advice be to charity chief executives who are navigating those systems that are themselves inherently biased? Where do you start?
Where do you start? It's such a big thing, isn't it? And oh my goodness, it's a fundamental societal issue and about what we're willing to accept and not accept as a nation and devolved nations. All I can share is my personal experience. The first is strengthen alliances. So we, as a BHF, work often and with huge strength with partners. So we're part of the Richmond Group of charities, which is a number of large charities focused on health and care issues. And we join forces whenever there are issues that affect patients. So most patients in their older years will live with more than one condition, so have what we call multimorbidities. So we work really closely with the other charities in that coalition that are focused on cancer, mental health, age, diabetes, you name it. And we work together as chief execs and as wider teams to think about how do we influence where we are more than the sum of our parts together. So my first advice would be strengthen alliances and look for people who share the same issues. It will save time and money. It will make you more powerful and to be able to open doors and have conversations. And generally the learning as well as the support that comes from those relationships as well as working practices is a bit of magic in itself. It's I think, a really powerful thing. I think it's a defining thing in our UK sector. I think we have so much to do. We have way more to do as a charity sector than we have the resources to do. So actually looking for alliances and opportunities to make more of a difference than we can alone is a fundamental. The second would be to be really clear on where you think you can make a difference. So I think I've seen so many really clever and creative examples of people either campaigning or seeking opportunities in a rapidly changing kind of political and funding landscape to tackle inequalities. So I think being really clear on what matters to you as an organisation, what's your purpose, mission, and where are the inequalities that are hurting that the most, and then being really creative and nimble in terms of how you look for both reactive opportunities on top of your kind of strategic goals to deliver that would be really good. And the last one is don't give up. We're talking about huge societal changes. We're talking about kind of inequalities that affect millions and millions of people across the UK. So is it a huge issue? Yes. And I think resilience and determination to do something about that is in itself a power. And so sticking with it, because we know we can make a difference. We can see lots of examples of organisations that every day are helping save and transform lives and making a real difference for people, their families and communities. So seeing the light that comes from that and holding on to that and not giving up, I think is probably my last bit of advice. Be determined, because it does make a huge difference.
And on the topic of big societal challenges, anti-racism is something that you are prioritising. I understand that you've recently released a new anti-racism statement. It's an issue that everybody in society and the sector is trying to tackle or needs to be tackling. Tell us about your anti-racism statement and how BHF is positioning itself as an actively anti-racist organisation.
So for us, it was not enough just to talk about the desire to be inclusive and diverse as an organisation and to have great policies in place and training programmes that shifted the dial for us. It was important that we were clear that we are an anti-racist organisation that takes proactive steps to remove racism and bias from within as well as from without. And that was at the heart of our recent publication of a statement and communication and engagement within the organisation as well as externally. And I applaud all the other organisations that have done that as well. I think it's an important statement of intent and value, and it's an important part of the mix for us as a British Heart Foundation. So that was the driver between us publishing it, and to be honest, they're doing a huge program of engagement internally as well to celebrate what that means to us and to recognise that the job isn't done as well. It's so easy, isn't it, in life to think there's a publication, a strategy, a policy, and that must be enough, and clearly it isn't. So this is part of our ongoing program that is communicating what's important to us and why, and it's a statement of intent of the change that we need to see within the BHF and without.
And for anybody who's hasn't read it, could you tell us what's at the essence of this anti-racist statement?
The essence, and please do check it out on our website, it's published there more eloquently than I will summarise. In essence, we recognise that racism and inequalities are part of the driver for heart and circulatory disease being so prevalent within the UK. We recognise we have a role to do in ourselves as an organisation to be anti-racist, but also to tackle racism and bias that exists in how people are diagnosed, treated and cared for within the UK as well, and how that turns up and shows up in research environments. So the anti-racism statement is a statement of intention that lays out the fact that we, one, believe we need to do something about it, and two, that our strategy and goals have articulated the things we're going to focus on most to make a difference.
And earlier you spoke about the fact that it's not enough to just talk about being anti-racist, and there's actually action that is needed. So how is BHF sort of crossing that line between being non-racist and being more passive and being actively anti-racist?
For us, it's been super important, one, to just name it as a factor, name it as the fact that racism does exist within healthcare services, it inevitably exists in society, and to be really clear on what we will clearly not just won't tolerate as an organisation in who we are and how we work, but also how more positively can we look to drive increased awareness, increased appreciation, increased empathy, increased curiosity, and across colleagues and for us as a team, but also to change those practices and processes proactively, understand where racism intersects with how we work and how to remove that from our systems. So it's a combination, I think, of the softer elements of culture and the power of just even naming it as a factor, and then the more operational details of just really being clear about where we think that can be addressed both through our policies and processes as well. So it's people, but also process.
I wonder, would you be able to share an example of a way that you as an organisation, perhaps through some of your policies, have worked to actively address something that has been identified as racist?
So an interesting challenge that we would have, and I think many other organisations I've watched tackle as well, is how to make sure that you are representative of the communities you serve in your communications, your marketing, and your engagement in a way that genuinely means you are connecting with the people you're there to serve. But does that in a way that has evoked a response from the wider public or supporters in terms of having an objection to representation in advertising campaigns or in using people of different ethnic minorities in our kind of marketing and communications. And so I think us in those cases where we've had objections on occasion from doing that, and I believe it's the right thing, it's us being representative genuinely of the people we're here to serve, where there had been objections from publicly around what that representation looks like for us as a BHF, being really clear, calmly, that this is part of who we are, this is part of who we are as a UK society, and what is important to us in representation has been a really important part about naming our stance as an anti-racism organisation, but also being really proud of how we are working and what that means to us. So probably one of the most recent examples I can name is just being very clear we won't tolerate racism, and actually that we are being proactive in terms of supporting representation in all of its forms across us as a BHF. We're proud of who we are. We want to be even more diverse, and that's a journey we're on, but proud to talk about it actively and tackle those difficult conversations with respect and calmness where they happen about what that means for us and how we turn up in our comms and marketing as much as who we are as a team.
And navigating objections from the public when you're simply making your stance known and being representative as well, which is obviously a very important thing. How has BHF dealt with those objections when they've come up? So you mentioned being calm and being sort of steadfast, but how do you make sure that you're sort of retaining your broad church of supporters while also being very steadfast and solid in your commitment to represent and be anti-racist?
And you're right, we are steadfast in it. And for me, the huge power and probably the strongest part of why we need to do this and why it's so important is I think everybody, regardless of background, gender, ethnicity, or any kind of characteristic, would want nothing more than their loved ones to have a healthy heart for longer. They don't want to lose people to heart and circulatory disease. And when we start and finish with the reason we need to do this is being the very best BHF and the very best team we can be, starts and ends with being representative of the people we're here to serve. And for us, that is the UK population. There is a huge simplicity and power to the discussions that come around that. There is no fear or favour in how that is executed. For us as a BHF, that is the purest sense of our mission. So when then we come to conversations around, well, how we make choices about turning up for people in different communities and people from different ethnic minority backgrounds, how we choose to represent people from across the brilliant UK society and all its wonderfulness and richness, then of course we don't tolerate and will name racism or discrimination where we see it, but drawing it back to the mission of the reason we need to do this is because heart disease isn't discriminatory. It affects all families from around the world, let alone across the UK. For me, that's a really powerful start and end point to the discussion. It's our purpose, it's our mission, it's at the heart of who we are.
Which makes perfect sense to me. I wonder, have you faced much backlash from members of the public or indeed perhaps long-standing supporters who object to your quest to be more representative and anti-racist?
The majority of our supporters, by volume for sure, see it as the simple kind of rationale that we've just discussed. There are occasions, of course, when we do get backlash, often on social media, which I think in the world is probably one of the most difficult areas to have a balanced discussion, just by the nature of the format. And we have brilliant teams who are trained in how to address it and be steadfast in our position and calm and assured. But also, to be really clear again, the reason we're doing this is because heart disease does affect all families from all places, and it's our job to turn up for them. Has been for 64 years, will be for many decades, if not centuries still to come. So it's hard, and most of our supporters themselves are incredibly supportive and often self-moderate. I'm sure you see that in lots of places. We do in the BHF too. There's a self-moderation that happens within our supporter community. But our team and our brilliant supporter team in particular have a lot of experience on how to handle it and how to remain steadfast in our position.
Well, Charmaine, that seems like a good note to end it on. Really interesting to hear about how you are incorporating your EDI principles, your ambitions, and your anti-racism work into the very crux of what you do as a charity and why you exist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to speak with you both.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Charmaine, and picking up on the last portion of that interview, do listen out for another episode on the subject of anti-racism in the next few weeks. We'll be hearing from the Chief Executive of the Equalities charity BRAP, with perspectives from the bosses of Comic Relief and UNICEF UK as well. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Jude Owen.